Hello, Gareth here at SIOAAA talking about that term, business services. Now I'll be upfront, this video is not just about the framework definition of what business service is. If it was, it would be a pretty short video. It's Gareth here at SIOAAA. A business service is a service delivered by a business unit to business customers. Okay? See you next time. And also not a particularly enlightening or useful video. And that definition of a business service I think's really ambiguous, not helpful really as it's written. I've worked in an organisation where it means different things from the last, and in some it's not common at all. Essentially though, what we're talking about is the structure of the CMDB and relationship mapping that exists between configuration items and their relevance to business services. This is to make sure that the information within your CMDB works for you, rather than it just being a dumping ground of data that is loosely managed, which you arbitrarily call a CMDB because best practices say that you have to have a CMDB. Let's go back to that definition and look at the wording a bit closer. So a service delivered to a business customer by business units. Or you could say, to make it more relative or understandable, a service delivered to users by IT. I think that in itself starts to make it a little bit more user-friendly. Now, talk to any IT user and they'll be able to list those things that they use to do their job day to day, the telephony system, email service, printing, etc. But internally within IT, we use a different language and we don't talk in those terms. We talk about switches, SANs, databases, servers, and certain teams will only talk or care about the components of a service for which they are responsible for or are dependent upon. That's tough enough in a single stack organisation, but what if your business service has components provided by different third parties? Then it gets really tricky to understand those dependencies and relationships. But I think those relationships are really important and for a range of different operational purposes, if they're properly implemented and mapped, it can bring real value to your services. Now, in most organisations, the understanding of those relationships exists, but most of the times this is in people's heads and not in the CMDB. For example, certain members of your IT team will know that a particular service runs on a particular server, but for example, how do you ensure that the problem team, when they may be investigating a bunch of incidents logged against that server, how will they be aware of the impact those incidents have? What is it affecting for end users? Or when a change comes through for that server, that the change manager knows, okay, which service is at risk by doing this change. And again, that's where the importance of these relationship mappings can really come in and really pay off. I always start off by making sure within the ITSM toolset that there is a list of business services that are used across your customers or your businesses in terms that are consistent with how users talk about the services that they consume. For example, nowadays everybody uses email. So if your tooling allows it and it matters that you can measure the difference as well, you might opt to break these business services down into further subcategories based on what your company, your department has in play. For example, you might have a bunch of users using predominantly a cloud email service and some using an on-premises solution. And yes, I said on-premises. It would make sense to be able to differentiate between them. When a user calls up the service desk to report that email is not working, well, you're going to need to know which one if you've got more than one service, but still that they make up a common email business service delivered from IT to the rest of the business. Now, when your users call up to report an issue, they're not going to know, how would they, that the specific CI that's broken. They're not going to be able to say it's this server or this database. Therefore, for consistency, I think incident tickets should always be logged under the applicable business service that the user is reporting is at fault. The alternative is that you have incidents logged against perhaps disparate CIs that can carry inconsistencies and lots of errors. If we follow that incident through to its conclusion, one of your technical teams is going to capture as part of their resolution activity, yeah, we had to fix this configuration item. And hopefully, if that item is loaded into your CMDB and your process mandates, the resolution details include what was fixed. Now, already we have a relationship between a business service and the CI that was fixed to restore service. But that's only going to live in that specific incident ticket. And that's not the most appropriate place for some of the other operational benefits that you can achieve. I can't stress enough how important I think it is that the resolution details are accurately recorded when service is restored. I've seen it so many times whereby the details of what was captured at logging are simply replicated into the what did we fix or equivalent field. And I think that's useless on two fronts. With the greatest respect, users aren't IT experts and they're not expected or supposed to be. So when they call up to report that it's email that's broken, but it actually transpires further on down the line that it was the network that's at fault, you have to take the information that was captured at logging with a bit of a pinch of salt. And even the best triage can't be expected to be 100% accurate at the point of logging to confirm what is specifically broken. Therefore, if the information is wrong at the point of capture, even if that is a genuine mistake or miss based on the information presented at the time, it's still going to be wrong if it's not rectified as part of the steps of resolution. And the second reason I think it's useless, even if the right business service is selected at logging, i.e. the telephony service is broken, if the resolution details simply state that to fix the telephony service, we fixed the telephony service, well, yeah, obviously, but what value is that information giving to anybody, especially those that really rely upon it, like problem management? I'd encourage you to really measure the effectiveness of how your teams, engineers, service desk, whomever is involved in the resolution of tickets, I'd really encourage you to look at how effective that is working. Now, most, if not all, ITSM toolsets allow you to build or map the relationships between business services, and I think it's really beneficial to invest the time to do that and make sure that this is an integral part of your change process and or acceptance into service processes. This can make for a daunting task, particularly if you're starting from a position where you've got no mapping at all within your toolset. What I'd say to that though, if you've survived this long without doing it, well, any minor improvement is only going to be a bonus. So my advice, start off small and gradual and have a clear vision of where you take it next. For me, I think it's always worthwhile starting with your most critical service and mapping that. There's a couple of practical things I think are essential to making sure you have what you need in order to make the most of this. If you don't have these in place, no matter how hard you try to map your services, there will be gaping holes in your process, which is simply going to devalue the whole exercise and lead the information that you've worked hard to capture to be quickly out of date. So let's have a look at those. Number one, the list of business services your business or customers use. Now, hopefully you have a service portfolio which details live services and all of their attributes. I'll be making a future video on that, by the way. If you don't, well, it's not hard to make a list of everything you know your IT service provides to users, and where needs be, of course, engage with your stakeholders to refine that in terms that they understand. Number two, as I've mentioned, the ability for your service desk to log tickets against the business services or the list of business services that you have, and make sure that you're providing the service desk with the associated training and support to ensure that that happens consistently and that you've got measures in place to track that that's happening. Similarly, number three, that your technical teams have the ability to record which configuration item it was that they fixed to restore service, and just like with the service desk, there's the appropriate training, support and measures to catch that that's happening on a routine basis. Number four, more broadly, start to build up a picture of how these relationships and dependencies exist and rely on one another, and have a very clear vision about, once you've mapped one service, well, what's the next important service to map, and where are the interdependencies between those services, and of course, make sure that's within your tool set. And finally, number 5, make sure that your operational processes factor in using the mapping information that you've spent lots of time creating. There's absolutely no point making the investment, be that in tooling, time, effort, just to sit back and be proud that your CMDB or critical services are relationship mapped. You've got to use the information not only to make sure that it's maintained, but to make sure your service is continually improved, can be made cheaper, faster, better, and so on. Well, otherwise, all of your hard work is just going to gather virtual dust on your virtual shelf. So why bother to all of this? Well, there's a ton of ways taking this approach can be used for the greater good. And maybe I'll make a part 2 to this video to run through some of those other benefits. But for now, here are what I found to be the most effective and easy to do operationally to get you started. Most organisations I've worked in have their event management processes and naturally their incident management processes. And yes, things find their way from one function to the other. But think about what I was saying earlier about the difference in language between how your users talk about IT and how internal IT teams do. Events are triggered from monitoring tools and are focused normally at the configuration item layer rather than the service for which that CI is a core component, and that makes total sense. Even for a fairly unsophisticated service, there may be multiple CIs, and having these alerts triggered against the service could prove costly. Firstly, the event is there to draw attention to where attention is required, very specifically. The event is in part doing the triage for you. Therefore, you wouldn't want to lose sight of this. And for services with many CIs, you could potentially have many alerts and events. And having these logged against the service instead, well, you wouldn't be able to see the wood for the trees. However, logging events purely and only against CIs that have no relationship mapping, well, again, how will your teams know the impact the event has on a service? Again, that's probably most likely in people's heads. Investing time in mapping your critical services and their relationships will greatly increase your possibilities and capabilities in terms of responding to events and in turn incidents. Now, I've dealt with issues firsthand whereby a major incident has been declared and once service has been restored, criticism has been levelled by business stakeholders that it was the users and them that spotted the issue before IT. In one scenario I dealt with, the issue was captured by the monitoring team, but the lag in time determining what that thing was that was throwing out alerts and what it impacted and whether that was a critical issue or not, naturally led to the users in front of the failed service being able to beat IT to reporting the issue. In reality, the monitoring tools had captured it, but our response to that alert was much slower than a user being able to pick up the phone to the desk. And to be honest, that's always going to be a race of sorts. But if your CIs are mapped, and again, if you've got logic which can direct tickets to the right place automatically, this connects to this, that relies on that, this is fundamental to this, then that's going to allow your teams handling these sorts of alerts and tickets to get to the right answer much quicker. As I mentioned previously, if the data used within your ITSM is well trained, tooled and measured, as well as linking dependent CIs together, your power of investigation into root cause again can increase dramatically. That old saying unfortunately comes into play, shit in, shit out, and using service data within your ITSM to identify problems and patterns and trends is no different. Again, similar to what I was saying about events and correlation, the same benefits can benefit problem management, particularly after the event, pardon the pun. In root cause investigation, yes, it's common practice to review the logs, events, etc. for the failed components, but more broader than that can be difficult to do. Even more difficult if teams like problem management don't have a very granular, very deep technical insight into how the overall solution hangs together. Therefore, having CI's relationship mapped to services and between each other can often allow teams to identify where hidden root causes might be lying. So this one is worth its weight in gold. If you're like me, you'll have been involved in changes that are well planned, well communicated, properly implemented, but then the dreaded, oh, we've got a service outage call lands. Once that's put right, as part of the post-change review, you find that the thing you were changing was critical to a thing that was critical to another thing. And as a result of that change, here, you've caused a major incident over there. Now, mapping lets you understand and gets to grips with those dependencies. You're going to have to invest significant amounts of time to fully mitigate any unplanned outage. That one could argue that doesn't give a good return on investment. When you're managing multiple changes at the same time for different services, like I've described before, change should act, in my opinion, as the air traffic control tower at the airport. Like the tower does with planes, change management wants to prevent the two things colliding into one another and causing a disaster. Now, a lot of the time, those dependencies are known, but again, as I've said, are in people's heads, which is an approach laden with risk. If any member of your team, without that subject matter expert to hand, can identify that these two changes can't take place at the same time or in close proximity because of the codependency, that's going to increase the efficiency of your service and provide greater service stability and confidence to your user base. As I've said, I'll aim to do a follow-up video in some weeks with some further benefits, but for now, let me have your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell thingy. And remember, if your IT service is hanging, switch it off and on again. Until next time, see you soon.